was about 10 years ago that Amish decided to become an author. In fact, it started with self-publishing his first book. He was moving around with his manuscripts. Not many publishers were willing to publish his book, but then he decided to self-publish it. It was a very different India back then, Amish. It's great to have you with us on ET Now. Very warm welcome.
Thank you, Vikram. Absolute pleasure being here. Pleasure talking to you as always.
Amish, 10 years ago when you started self-publishing your own book, it was a very different India then. You were a banker, you had a steady job going for yourself, and I am Kolkata pass out, but you discovered a joy and a passion for writing. But then it doesn't stop over there. You need to ensure that you find a publisher for a book as well. You didn't, and you decided to go the self-publishing route. Tell us about the dynamics at play at that time.
Look, this was, my first book was published in 2010. It was a different world, at that time. Social media had grown, but not to such a huge extent. There weren't that many smartphones. One should remember that. YouTube had become reasonably big. So it was a far more difficult world to want to be a self-publisher. In today's day, you have the Amazon print-on-demand options, and you can theoretically distribute only online today. Those days you needed physical distribution. So it was, it was in a way a brave bet, but bravery and stupidity can only be judged in hindsight. At that time, I wasn't thinking too much. I just wanted to try the best that I could for my book. I had the support of my family and my friends, and we just launched it.
You're absolutely right, Amish, because many times you will find that success is measured only in hindsight. At that point in time, it could be stupidity, but it's just that even if it's stupidity, you can't take away the fact that you were an IIM Kolkata pass out. You were a banker. You had to play your cards right, at least to some extent. So I'm just wondering, how much stupidity did you allow yourself? What were the economics of self-publishing your book then?
Look, how the economics of publishing works, it's like any creative space, okay? There is no average. You either get all or you get nothing, right? 99.5% of authors don't even make enough to pay the bills at the end of the month. 0.5% make more money than they ever dreamed possible, make even more money than bankers, right? So it's not something that fits into a logical business plan, which is why the creative industries are driven by passion. People are doing it simply because they love what they do, not because they're trying to, they see it as a part of a business strategy formulated in an Excel. I'm talking about startups, right? Over time, of course, as a company grows bigger, Disney, you have multiple creative products. So then you can kind of hedge your bets. So how it was for me, essentially there was the cost of printing of the books, which my agent at that time invested in, and I invested in the marketing, so my investment was bigger. The trailer film, we made booklets, the first chapter of the book, which are distributed as samplers, and many of these marketing ideas had never been tried before for a book, and they really ended up pushing the book, Immortals of Eloa, my first book, at a completely different level. The kind of marketing techniques which weren't done earlier. I think the lesson I drew, it's not about the size of your budgets, which determines the success of a marketing idea. It's about the creativity of those ideas. And that's what actually I think worked for me. I invested from my own savings. Baap Dada ka aashirwad hai, jaidaad kuch nahi hai. So, but I was a banker, I'm an IIM Calcutta graduate, banking, it's a boring job, but it pays reasonably well. So most of the investments essentially went from my own personal savings.
So then if you think about it in hindsight, this was a bootstrapping literary startup. In the publishing business, that's what it is. As much as you were driven by your creative passion, but then of course there was a lot of money at stake as well, money of your own that you were putting in. So yes, there was that, but you weren't entirely shooting in the dark, were you?
Yeah, of course not. So look, the way it works is in any startup, you have to be willing to experiment. Now the experimentation should be thought through, but you cannot work out every single detail, because the moment you start the experiment, the market changes, right? There's this line for war, but I think it applies in in business as well. that the most detailed war plans, fall to dust, in the reality of the battlefield, right? Because things change, and you have to be able to rejig, to pivot, depending on what you see. So what we were doing was thinking through what our core strategy is, and then what our core business problem is, and then coming out with tactics and strategies to solve our business problem. So let me put it, not as a creative person, but as a business person, let me put it in down to brass tacks. What was my core business problem? I was a debut author, writing in a genre which the entire industry was convinced will never work, because books on religious subjects, books on mythology, at least in the English language space, weren't working. So, and I wasn't backed by a big publisher. Like, one of the biggest problems is retailers will not display your books unless you're backed by a big publisher like Westland or Penguin, or so if your books don't even get displayed, then how do you sell? Now, this was a core business problem that I was facing. Now, how do we solve this? Okay, because marketing cannot exist in a vacuum. It has to serve the business problem that you're facing. So one of the first things we did was made sure that we had good distributors. I tied up with two good distributors: Westland, which was my distributor earlier, later became my publisher, and Prakash Books in the north. So Prakash Books in the north, Westland in the south and west, and Prakash in the north and east. And so the books were widely available because it was backed by good distributors. Then the second thing that we did was, how do we get the books displayed at bookstores? Because remember, what happens in the book business is, cartons can get sent to the store and it'll lie in some in some toilet somewhere. Forget about the customers. Even the store staff won't know the book has been launched, and a year later the books will just be returned. The stocks will be returned. How do we ensure that the books were displayed? What we did was, it was an idea that had never been tried before. Not my idea. Some from the team. My ex-wife, actually, at that time, she'd come up with. At that time, she was my wife. She'd come up with this idea. We made a booklet of the first chapter with the same cover as the cover of the main book. And I went to various chain stores with a PowerPoint presentation. They never had authors coming with a PowerPoint presentation, and I told them that I want to give you this free sampler. What's your problem? It's not costing you anything. Just display this. They'd never tried this before, so so they were willing to cut me some slack, and they displayed the booklets at the cash counter. Now think about it. I'm talking about 2010. Cash counters, prime display space. You have not customers who are hanging around. They've come to the cash counter. They're waiting for billing, right? And there's this magic 8 or 10 seconds where they have absolutely nothing to do because the bill is being generated. Remember those days, smartphones weren't that widespread, so you weren't distracted. Now, a customer standing in front of the cash counter, 8-10 seconds, nothing to do, and there's this nice booklet with a very nice cover, big stamp of free on top. Many of them picked it up. They went back home. They read the first chapter, and then they came back and asked the store, "Listen, I like this. Where's the book?" Okay, we launched this a week before the launch of the book. The chapter samplers themselves did so well that many of the stores raised their order within the first week of and before the launch of the book, with the result that we hit the bestseller charts in the week of launch itself, which is unheard of for a debut book, and that too self-published. Right? So that marketing really worked. Now, this is, I think, creative marketing. Again, not my idea. You can give me the credit for picking a good idea or choosing a good idea. Idea wasn't mine, but we implemented it and it worked well.
Yeah, that marketing idea worked so well that you decided to give up your day job in banking and take that full-on leap into publishing and into writing, which is a big step to take. But 10 years since you took that major leap of faith, how much have you seen writing and how much have you seen Indian writing and publishing evolve? It's been a decade or so. So one would imagine that a new set of innovations would have come into play, the kind that you drove in marketing, but elsewhere as well in the industry. What have you seen so far?
I should clarify, I resigned only with my second book. So I'm a middle class guy. It was a very pragmatic, practical decision. Only when my royalty check became more than my salary. So I didn't jump just straight after the first book. And I always suggest this to all people. Follow your heart, but use your mind as well. Don't ignore either. Now, as far as the last 10 years are concerned, I think in some ways they've been transformational. In some ways there are challenges. So, to quote Dickens, the best of times, the worst of times. 10, 15 years ago, you could count on your fingers how many Indian authors would be in the top 10. It was normally dominated by foreigners and largely Westerners, Americans or British, largely. Reflected our culture, especially in the English language space, where we were, almost culturally subservient to the West. I'm not anti-West. It's a very successful culture. We should learn from it, but we should celebrate our own first. What you've seen in the last 10 years is transformational. Now the bestseller charts are dominated by Indians and not Indians from the West. With all due respect, I love Salman Rushdie's books and others obviously, but they're not Indian. They're Western Indian, right? It is their books are almost it's like a Westerner's exotic take on India. I'm talking about Indian writers who have grown up in India, whose idiom, whose culture, everything is deeply Indian, right? These are the kind of authors who dominate the bestseller charts now. 10, 15 years earlier, I mean, the writers from the real India, that's the way I see it. The real India is now the bestseller charts. 10, 15 years earlier, 5,000, 10,000 copies would mean you're a bestseller. Now, you'd have to sell at least 40, 50,000 copies to be a bestseller. There are a few authors who sell in the hundreds of thousands. There are two of us who are selling in the millions. So the market has expanded dramatically. At the same time, there are many bookstores that are shutting down. I think the massive increase in rental costs, which is hitting all retail industries, is hitting bookstores as well. Piracy is a serious problem. You will find, I think, over time, that the profitability of the average book keeps reducing more and more, and publishers will perhaps focus more and more on either the top sellers, a book where they're guaranteed it'll sell at least 40, 50,000 copies, so they know they'll make money off it, or the long tail, where it should sell 100, 150 copies, 200 copies, but it's not too expensive to publish, and if you sell that much every year, you can do a print on demand or just an ebook through Amazon, Flipkart, and you can make money there too. So there is a problem of profitability, especially for the average books, where you spend a lot of effort on editing, where you spend a lot of effort on and money on marketing, and those books don't pay. So publishers might focus more and more on the bigger books, and the long tail will survive simply because every author, their friends and family, they will check out.
This brings us to the question, Amish, that why has the real India, even as the numbers are growing the domestic market, we're not seeing that kind of export rise among global markets? Why has that not happened? Why have we not seen this kind of literary export of India take place, even as the interest in India has been rising?
I should clarify, the Indian authors, like the authors from the real India, their books are selling in massive numbers now, numbers that were unthinkable 10, 15 years ago. What I'm saying is that there's a problem of profitability for the publishing industry itself. Because remember, just the big hits, cannot justify an entire company, because the editing and marketing cost, the fixed cost, is the same for a book which sells 10,000 copies or a book which sells 100,000 copies. You just do a bit more on average marketing, but the editing cost, everything is the same, right? How do you justify the cost of a 5,000 copy or a 10,000 copy book, which is not profitable? That is where the key problem is. It is an interesting play out of Aristotle's hollowing out of the middle. The average is getting hit. Why is the average getting hit? Because average books used to sell through retail stores, through browsing. I love reading. There's nothing I like more than going to bookstores and just spending an hour out there. You'll discover books that are not the top sellers, right? Bookstores are themselves dying, which is hitting the average books. The top books will sell in any case, because remember, most people now buy on their phone, on their app. Okay, on an app, you normally, as a reader, you will go for a book that you're already searching for, which means the top sellers, and you'll buy it and you'll leave, because the app is not amenable to browsing. A bookstore is amenable to browsing. This is the key problem. So the real Indian authors are selling in big numbers. That's not the issue. The issue is the average book, not the small book or the big book, the average book, the 5,000, 10,000 copy book. How does this survive if the bookstores are shutting down? That is it's a structural problem. I don't think the industry has a solution for it. Like my book, for example, my latest book, Legend of Suhail Dev, we've launched it in the lockdown. It's selling at the same numbers as my previous book, Ravan, did. It's just that, Ravan 50% sales would be online, 50% offline through bookstores. Now, Legend of Suhail Dev, 80-85% is online, 10-15% is offline, retail books. By online, I don't mean e-books. I mean in physical books selling through online channels like Amazon and Flipkart. So a big selling book can do well on just if it's focused on online as well. The average book gets hit if the offline stores, the physical stores, continue to face structural issues. I don't know what the solution to this is, honestly.
But then tell us about yourself, Amish. I mean, 10 years is a pretty long time. So how have you evolved your own business? You started out with a big marketing innovation, but obviously you need to take it notches up with every new book that you come out with and ensure that those millions of copies for each book are a given. So what have you done and what do you plan to do next? Because the possibilities are huge, right? Film franchises, you can have animation characters, and all of those can be a global kind of phenomena. But how much of that are you pushing now?
The way I see it, one should see it at two levels. One is the what that we communicate. Second is the how. Right. One thing which I'm clear on, we will not change the what. Right. My stories are deeply Indian. They will remain deeply Indian. I'm not going to change those stories. If there's a different idea that strikes me, which has a big bit of the West and India, like there is an idea that struck me set in the modern day, I might come up with that. But stories that are set 4,000, 5,000 years ago, no, we are Indian and we will certainly, me and my team, we're very clear, we will keep it rooted in India. But how we communicate it we can certainly update that. I've set up my own team. I've started my own studio in India. I've hired senior bunch of people. My elder brother, Amish Tripathi, who's working KPMG, and Amarchand Mangaldas, he's joined. He's running it. There's a guy we've hired called Aman Kurwada. He has 14-15 years of TV experience. Fantastic guy. And we built a team under them. And we are thinking of various routes that are possible to take the creative message of my books to the larger world and to the West as well. Now, this could be in terms of different media. So how do we push the books themselves, online and physical? But we're also exploring gaming. We're thinking of building TVs and movies and TV series ourselves. Graphic novels. There are so many different media options that are available. We're going to focus on that, and of course, it's also the how is the messaging done, for it. So, so for example, I mean, I'm the director of the Nehru Center out here. If we are doing an Indian dance, for example, right? If we are presenting it to the Westerners, then we have to do a 3-minute introduction, right? Explaining what is the philosophy behind this dance. So the same with classical music, how Western classical music is fundamentally different from Indian classical music. Western classical music is written down and it's rigid, and the best you will think of an orchestra having performed well if they can bring their performance as close to the composer's composition. Whereas in Indian classical music, the philosophy itself is different. It's not written. There's like a boundary that is set up in a raga. And then within that, each artist will interpret the raga depending on the artist's own gharana, depending on the mood of the artist at that evening, depending on the audience reaction at that evening. So it's a completely different way of looking at life. Now, if you explain this to a Westerner, you've done this at the Nehru Center, you realize that they appreciate it a lot more because you give them a sense of having pull them into the real India. And one of the things I've seen, the Westerners really want to see authenticity. They want to see the real India, but we have to be able to explain it to them in a language that they understand. That's what the attempt will be for my stories and books as well. That's what the team will push.
Then if I were to ask you, Amish, at the kind of juncture that we are, if India has to build itself as a stronger soft power, then what does India need to concentrate on? Because you know so well about the literary world, and Indian diaspora has kind of absorbed it, but to take it to a larger world beyond that, that remains a big ask. But even the other fields that India has so much prowess in, this culture has lasted for such a long time, more than many other world cultures. But when you look at India as a soft power, a lot more ground needs to be covered. So what do we really need to work on?
Look, the reality is, let's be honest, till the recent past, we were underperformers for a country of our scale. We're the second largest country in terms of population in the world. A large part of our underperformance, still around 10, 15 years ago, was a result of us being economic underperformers as well. Pre 1991, we chose some unfortunate economic policies. Socialism has an unparalleled record of destroying economies wherever it has been tried, and well, it destroyed the Indian economy as well. Fortunately, with the economic reforms of 1991, we gave up to a certain extent the ghosts of socialism, and India started growing economically. As we grew economically, culture kind of lags economic success, right? So you'd see that by the mid 2000s, our cultural uh, you know uh, blueprint also started growing, right? Before that, there were flashes like Pandit Ravi Shankar, just individual genius, an absolute genius. He took music to new heights, but it was his individual genius. It wasn't a rising tide which lifted him as well. And which is why you'll find that post Pandit Ravi Shankar, again, our influence in the international music scene reduced. So you did have flashes like this, I'm not denying that, but it wasn't like a consistent delivery. You saw the same thing in sports as well. You had flashes of genius, but consistent delivery on sports, where we're winning medals regularly, we're winning cricket championships regularly, etc., has come with economic growth, because we had more money for better training, for better nutrition, right? The same thing will happen in culture as well. It started happening in the mid 2000s. We still have a long way to go, but at least the journey is moving in the right direction. Some numbers that I can certainly throw at you. The biggest soft power survey ever undertaken was this one, the Global Soft Power Index. I have the report out here, and this was done in the UK, and they had got former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon to give the speech, the keynote speech at it. I'd been invited to speak at it as well, but I was the only Indian on stage, perhaps the only Indian in the audience as well. We aren't, called in as regularly to such things, and even our ranking, if you see in that survey, was at number 27, if I recall correctly, which for the fifth largest economy in the world is still quite low. We can do better. But the thing to note is that we're moving in the right direction. We are improving. It's a matter of time. We will make it to the top 5, and within a generation, probably number 1 or number 2. But we need to keep working at it methodically. Culture does not change overnight. Cultural soft power does not get built overnight. It gets built slowly over time with regular, consistent effort.
Yes, Amish. So which are the fields that will actually lead the charge, as it were? Because it could be yoga, it could be books, films, music. There's so much that India has to offer. But of course, perhaps you need to prioritize, or does one need to kind of go in all guns blazing?
It'll be a combination of everything. It's not going to be just one activity. But some of the things I can tell you which we've done very well in the last few years. For example, Yoga Day. Living in the West, I can tell you now, since I'm in London for the last few months, there was a very real danger, from what I can speak to people of the last few years ago, of us losing ownership over yoga. Right? People would know yoga but not know that it's associated with India. I think one of the best things Prime Minister Modi ji did, in terms of the cultural space, and this government did, was Yoga Day, an international, global movement, which what it has done is very simply established ownership of India over yoga. We're not asking for IP payments or copyright or anything like that, but and people are free to use yoga. It is good for them, regardless of their background, religion, community, whatever. But they should acknowledge that the source is India, right? So yoga has been a massive, soft power growth area for us over the last few years, us having taken ownership of this. I suspect Indian movies will grow. Indian movies are, they do have influence in the UK, no doubt. A few countries like Egypt, in Russia, a generation ago, and in the subcontinent, in Southeast Asia. But yes, we have to grow a lot more. There are Indians now who are breaking into Hollywood mainstream as well. Indians who've gone from India, like Priyanka Chopra, and Indians who may have been born in the US, but are making their name in the Hollywood space. So it'll be a combination of various things. Cricket as it grows, as we become bigger in other sports, which are bigger in the West. As we start doing better at track and field events, as we start doing better at Olympics, books, hopefully, movies, you'll notice that, if you saw a TV series 30, 40 years ago, you'd struggle to find an Indian character. Think of the top series, 20, 25 years ago, Friends. There was no Indian character, or maybe one that Vikram in one series. Whereas Big Bang Theory, one of the biggest series of the recent past, had a mainstream Indian character. So you see things changing slowly, and I see it growing further and further.
Amish, thank you so much for joining us. It's always a pleasure chatting with you. Your new book, Suhail Dev, The Legend of Suhail Dev, is something that I'm just reading. And as always, I'm ensnared by this great mix that you have of mythology and history. It's a niche that you've generated for yourself and that you've stuck to. And now you're taking it on at different levels. So it's great to see you and evolve to this extent. And good luck with your job at the Nehru Centre in London. Thanks very much for joining us. All the very best.
Thanks, my friend. Pleasure as always chatting with you.